Thank you, Cameron. Thank you, everybody, for continuing to join us here at Postback. This is the session where all of the morning caffeine has passed out of our systems. We're in that blood sugar trough before lunch, so we're going to be extra high energy here to get everyone into lunchtime here on day 2. And so, right, as Cameron mentioned, what we're talking about today are ads to outcomes. So when we market, when we do our jobs as marketers, we don't do it for the fun and the excitement, although it is sometimes fun and it is sometimes exciting. We do it to drive outcomes, to drive user behavior, to get more customers for our business, to get more something. And I'm about to use a quote that's often overused, so I'm going to ask for a show of hands here. How many people have heard the old John Wanamaker saying that, quote, half of every marketing budget is wasted, the only problem is no one knows which half? Okay, pretty good show of hands, which is about what I was expecting. Well, that's less true now than it has ever been, especially in the digital world. Over the last 15 years, technology has made it much more possible to connect those dots, to connect what marketers do to the outcomes they're looking to drive. And the panel we have here today are 3 experts where that's what they do. They're tackling that problem right now, pulling technology together, and I'm really excited to get a chance to talk with everyone here today. So. Right, to kick things off, I'm going to let Eric, John, and Sherry introduce themselves, and then we'll get right into action. Eric?
Sure. My name is Eric Lau. I'm at Viacom as VP Partner Management Audience Development. Been there for almost a year.
My name is John Gibbons, and I'm at Atom Tickets, and I am a principal on the product team.
And my name is Sherry Lin. I head up marketing operations at Lyft. I've been at Lyft for about 8 months. Prior to that, I was at Uber, and then prior to that at Hotwire, which is an Expedia company, doing pretty much the same thing.
So just to get oriented here, again, we're talking about connecting A to B, connecting the advertising and the marketing we're doing to outcomes, and putting that dotted line to put the two together. So as a way of getting oriented, let's start about establishing A and B in this case, in this great game of connect the dots. Let's talk about the channels that your teams use and the kind of data that you handle. So just to start things off, what channels do your teams use, and what are the kinds of data that come from those channels that you have to assemble? Eric, you want to start?
Sure. Well, I guess to start, the portfolio of apps that I look after are essentially our mobile apps as well as our connected TV apps, and there are ad-supported TV everywhere apps. So MTV app on mobile, Comedy Central app on Roku. So the channels that we acquire users through are kind of your usual suspects, Facebook, Google, et cetera, on the mobile side, on the connected TVs, the platform partners themselves, Roku, Fire TV, et cetera. So, as far as, the data we're grabbing from them, obviously want to track where they're seeing these ads, where, the type of content they're watching, are they authenticating, since these are TV Everywhere apps, so it requires cable authentication. So those are the kind of things that we're trying to put together.
And on the Atom side, we're a mobile-first company, so we are using very similar sort of platforms. So we're going across social, so we're using Facebook, Snapchat, YouTube, Google. We also do a lot of programmatic and display, and then of course we use our own channels as well across the email and notifications.
And for us, for Lyft, we have what we call the driver acquisition campaigns and the passenger acquisition campaigns. On the driver side, it's almost all web-based. We send the people to the web, and they can sign on, et cetera. And then on the passenger side, it's almost all mobile install first. A lot of the usual suspects, we have our social channel, display, search. Job boards is actually a really important channel for us to recruit drivers. And then we have what we call the emerging channels, which are affiliate marketing and acquisition email. So that's pretty much the user acquisition channels. But then outside of UA, we also have our brand campaigns, as well as what we call ambassadors. So these are actually Lyft employees who go out there and recruit drivers face-to-face. And then we also have the referral channels, which is when the passenger refers a passenger, or a passenger refers a driver, or a driver refers a driver.
Great. So there's a pretty diverse set of channels we're talking about here, and the data is going to be different, and we're going to come back to that in a second with a question. But just again, to help everyone get oriented, in terms of what you're trying to drive and what your teams are trying to drive, the KPIs, the look of success, What does success look like across these different channels? What are you trying to do? So, Shara, if you want to start that.
I start? Okay. Within the growth organization, we have very specific driver activation and passenger activation goals. By activation, we mean when the passenger or the driver takes their first ride. We also have we have specific driver and passenger goals by each of our regions so that we can maintain that supply and demand balance by market. So that gets super complex. In addition to the acquisition goals, we also have a cost per incremental activation, like a ceiling, a threshold that we have to hold, we're held to for each of our marketing initiatives. Yeah.
Yeah, on the Atom side, our main KPI is box office share. So we are an agnostic movie ticket sales platform. And so our main goal is to increase our share of what we generate in terms of box office. So we look at that very closely every week, and for every movie to get a sense of like how much did we impact the sales of tickets. To go a little bit deeper from that, we are looking to increase our LTV like any other publisher. And we see increased LTV obviously through our apps, but we do have a lot of web traffic. So in a lot of cases, what we are trying to do in an effort to increase our box office share is to convert people who are on a web experience over to app and provide them with sort of meaningful engagement experiences that encourage them to become, to download the app, of course. And then people on the app to really make sure that we are socializing features to them that distinguish Atom from other platforms. The movie ticketing space is, it's kind of a commodity, right? So like if you think of like water, for instance, right? Like if I give you like a bottle of Arrowhead and then a bottle of like Fiji, you'd say like, oh, like Fiji's much better, right? Because it's got like a better shape, it's got like a better story behind it or whatever. But like if I take that behind a closed door and like pour them in a glass, right? Like they're kind of the same, right? So we really distinguish ourselves based on the features that we provide, and also we are a social platform. Like we really believe that moviegoing is a social experience, and we built features that address that and like supply that solution. But in order to get people to acknowledge that experience, we need to get them over to the app. So we're really focused on making sure that's a valuable experience when they're there, and then encouraging them to go to the app to experience that.
For me, it's fairly simple. It's enabling viewing wherever our users want to view content. Obviously, cable TV started with the TV, but now we have all these apps on all these different devices. We want to enable viewing in all those different places, which ultimately then increases viewership of our content, which then drives ad revenue for us. That's the kind of the explicit goal. I mean, there's definitely, there's also the supporting TV everywhere ecosystem and our, big partners in the traditional cable space. But yeah, we very much view all the app usage and app viewing as incremental to everything happens in the cable TV space and on linear, as we call it. So, that's why we're, going after that.
Got it. So, right, again, funnels, a number of funnels with different endpoints, activation for both riders and drivers, being able to activate folks on the best possible experience for tickets, being able to activate folks to actually watch content and consume content on the different channels that you're trying to drive. So going back to the first part, where we're talking about the different channels your teams are using, there's a lot of data that's coming from all those different channels, and I suspect that the data that comes from those different channels can vary by quite a bit. That they each have their own unique challenges about, again, trying to connect them to those outcomes that you're trying to measure. So when it comes to those different channels that are in play, what are the different data streams that you're trying to adapt to, and how are they different? What are the different challenges involved in them?
Well, I'll go ahead and start. So I would say that our biggest challenge, and we talked a little bit about this earlier. So, but the biggest challenge that we have is that when we look at one single channel, like I think that we are successful in sort of understanding that channel. When we try to integrate all of our channels together, it becomes a little bit foggy, which is the largest challenge that we have. We really view ourselves as a data company that has an e-commerce component that sells movie tickets, right? Like, we are a data company. So we are heavily focused on making sure that we are organizing the data in a way that allows us to get the best view into what those outcomes are. But it does become a little bit fragmented when we try to combine all the different verticals, and that's something that is increasingly, not increasingly, but it's a frustrating experience because it's 2018, so it just sort of seems like we would have done this by now. But when we look at web, we're kind of ninjas there, right? And when we look at mobile, we're very, very good at it. And we look at offline, it's just offline. So that's probably for later on in the conversation for what we want in the future. But when we look at notifications and look at email, that's a little bit different. But when we try to combine them all, it's a frustrating exercise.
We have a
Yeah, I agree. It's certainly for us, I think the big differences for us is on mobile versus connected TV, and I think some of my peers on the OTT panel yesterday got at it. But on mobile, there's all sorts of great vendors. It's kind of well known. People kind of have figured it out. Versus on connected TV, and by that I mean the Roku, the Fire TVs of the world, Apple TV. That's where it's still just kind of a little bit of a wild, wild west. We're beholden to the platform partners. There's not 5 different technology vendors that you can kind of choose from. So it's not quite there yet. And certainly then when you're trying to combine it all, it's a mishmash of where you have excellent data versus kind of shoddy. So it's definitely a challenge. I agree.
On the user acquisition side, I think we're in pretty decent shape. So all of our displays, search, et cetera, I think that we have a pretty good view of all of the metrics, including the spend all the way into impressions, clicks, and down the funnel. It gets tricky, similar to what John said, when we go into our brand efforts and our referral efforts and ambassador efforts. Those are not really, there's no one database that contains all of those touch points. So we are looking at things within the UA silo, which we're trying to change.
Got it. So we've got some silos that individually, have the problem solved in a lot of ways, or solved reasonably well. Web, mobile, but when you get outside it gets very difficult. So let's talk about the mechanics of it, how it actually is working in practice and how your organizations are tackling this right now. Let's describe the stack. So when it comes to how you're actually doing this, the systems you've got in place, either the ones that you're partnering with technology partners with or the ones you've built yourself, describe how you're actually tackling the problem right now. Sherry, you want to start?
Sure, I can start. So I'll speak to the UA universe because all of the other channels, like I mentioned, we still have challenges. So we currently work with probably more than 3 or 4 dozen vendors, marketing partners across both passenger and driver. So getting all of that spend data into our internal system. So we ingest all of the spend, and then we marry it up with our conversion data to get the cost per acquisition or the ROI. So getting the spend data from all of these different partners who vary in degrees of sophistication is a huge amount of work. So we actually, speaking of tech stack, we actually work with a third-party vendor who actually aggregates all of that data for us. They clean the data, they have API integrations. There are some smaller partners that are less sophisticated where literally somebody is sending them a CSV file with the daily spend, and they clean all of that and normalize it, and then we have one API endpoint that we use to ingest that spend. And it's also really important for us to ingest that spend at the most granular level possible. So it's not just knowing which partners and how much we spend with them. We want to know how much by campaign, by ad group, by creative, by keyword. So that's on the spend side, which we use a partner for. On the conversion side, we use an internal system. We use tracking in our URL, and we store that data into our own database, also at the most granular level. That's for the web side. And then, of course, on the mobile app side, we use Tune to help us with tracking our install and all the way down the funnel. And we ingest all of that, compare the spend, or connect the spend with the funnel metrics, and out comes the ROI.
So for us, we dominantly rely on our own data. So we do outsource for some activities. Dominantly, we heavily rely on our own data. Like, we do sales, so we know our own attribution. We do work with partners to be able to help us connect to sort of the top of the funnel, of course. And we're using among sort of the standards like Facebook and Google for that. We do leverage partners to help us visualize our data. We're a SQL company, so again, we're very, very data-driven. We're in Amazon. Everyone at Atom, for the most part, is Amazon. So we all kind of grew up with that sort of point of view on building a business. But with that said, like it can definitely feel at times like the analogy that I used backstage was that, sometimes we're kind of like a scuba diver and we don't really know if we're like pointing down or pointing up, and it can be dark sometimes, and so we definitely need help sometimes, like lighting the way or understanding like if the bubbles are going up or so we do have partners that help us sort of understand the data a little bit better. And then, of course, we also have partners that help us sort of connect the top to the bottom. But dominantly, we rely on our own data and our own data scientists to be able to help us connect those dots.
Yeah, for us, I mean, to be perfectly honest, we're still kind of early days in a lot of this stuff, but working with a number of different vendors such as Tune, and it's interesting for us because we've even though we're an old company, we're new to this, and a lot of stuff, the systems that we have built, we're kind of focused on more traditional marketing, driving linear ratings and everything. So really starting to kind of get the ball rolling there. And as I mentioned earlier, definitely on connected TV, it's still very much new. That tech stack is evolving as the platforms evolve, and we're very much beholden to those platforms, for a lot of this stuff. So it remains to be seen. A lot of it's still kind of in progress.
Got it. And Eric, you're touching on something that I wanted to dive deeper into, which is, right, when new channels do emerge, how that happens. So for example, what you're doing right now with Connected TV at Viacom, Connected TV is a comparatively young channel. It's it feels old because, well, we all watch a lot of television. I don't want to speak for everyone. I watch a lot of television. But, right, we're really only talking about something that's really taken root in the last few years. And so one question I want to ask the group is, when a new channel emerges, either one that you want to use or your teams want to use, or someone comes to you with a crazy idea that says, we need to be running something on voice, or we've got to do something with, lawn ads or, skywriting from biplanes. What are the first questions that you ask to pull that data together? What is your thought process about, okay, how am I going to reconcile that with all the other stuff we're doing?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's, trying our best to figure out how we can compare apples to apples. Like, at the end of the day, we want to try and compare, our spend on mobile versus our spend on connected TV, the LTVs for that, the cost per acquisition for that, and, which ones make sense. So, as much as I can, trying to look at the same types of data points, same type of metrics, to kind of keep those things apple to apple. It's not always possible. Certainly, Alexa, as you mentioned, is something that we're just getting involved with. We have a few Alexa skills, and that's measurement's very hard. Attribution's very hard in a voice world. So, it's a tricky balance, sure.
Yeah, it's a hard. Well, one, I would say you shouldn't do skywriting. I wouldn't pitch skywriting. But I would say that for us, again, sort of going back to our own first-party data, because we have attribution, we use our own customers as a means of generating larger, lookalike audiences, right? So, like to supplement the earlier question, the other tools that we're using are tools that allow us to build lookalike audiences, and I think because of the business that we're in around movies. There's it's a little bit sort of wider audience and a little bit more acceptance of like what we're selling. But I would say that as we look at new channels, we look at any way that we can leverage our first-party data as a way to be more exact about the audience that we can reach on those new platforms. So as I think about like what you guys are dealing with, like it's a really murky area that's new and exciting and wonderful, and there's clearly huge audiences there, but it's hard to make that like one-to-one connection. So in terms of really sort of understanding like the ads to outcomes, it becomes challenging. But at some point, they're going to be able to connect, a Roku device to a cell phone, like a device ID, for instance. But right now, the means of which that's done is a little bit challenging.
Yeah, I mean, as the person in charge of trying to figure out tracking, whenever there's a new channel, especially a channel that is not digital, the first thought is always, yeah, how are we going to connect the conversion to the actual touch point of marketing? How do we attribute this conversion, which we know all of them. Once they actually become a driver, once they sign up, we know, all of the funnel steps. It's really connecting that back to what ad did you see and what ad did you click on. That becomes really tricky. But besides, the usual methods of fingerprinting or clicking on a link and things like that, there are other methods that we can use to try and track it back. For example, we could use a promo code. I gave the example of the ambassador program, so it is something that's offline, but they do enter a unique promo code, and we can track that back to the source of the conversion. That works for some new channels. It doesn't work for all. There's definitely some, like billboards, for example, that we still have to solve for. And that, unless you have a special promo code or a vanity URL, you probably can never track. And even with a promo code or a vanity URL, it's probably just tracking a tiny percentage of the real actual attribute conversion. So it's not perfect by any means. I've seen companies where they have data scientists that try to solve for this by doing some really complex modeling and A/B testing of a test market versus a control market. None of that is perfect, but you do the best you can given the medium.
So now I'm going to reach into my suit jacket and play, and let's say I had in here a magic wand that basically could stop time, give infinite resources, and there's only one condition, which is that it had to all be invested in this problem, the problem of connecting, the marketing that you're doing to your outcomes. So you can write your own ticket, and it will materialize, and I can wave that wand, and it'll just happen. So let's say we did that. What would you use the wand to create? What is the ideal world that would materialize if you had that available?
Yeah, I mean, for us, that's actually kind of happening right now for us. Interestingly, in the past, all of our apps, the MTV app, Comedy Central app, they're all kind of separate code bases, and now we've just kind of brought them all to one platform, which is nice. So in that sense, we have actually torn everything up, and we're trying to be methodical about it. I mean, we're trying to, maybe this is a little too general, but we're trying to be very specific about what are the business needs that we're trying to solve. Building a criteria before we even talk to a vendor, and going through that criteria with each vendor, and just trying to be as careful and thorough as we can. I think at a company like Viacom, it's nice to have resources, but at the same time, it's also a lot of different stakeholders. Things can move a little bit slowly. Different types of needs. So we're trying to just do our best to be as thorough and careful with each step as we go along.
Do you have unlimited resources? Do you have a blank check?
Not unlimited.
So I think sort of going back to the earlier statement about this, I think for us it would really be a means of being able to compile all these disparate channels into one and being able to connect them. Like there are certainly examples where we are miscounting because a particular device will, or if we had like a device graph that would like connect all these devices to be able to identify a single consumer across these channels, that would be ideal. It's something that we just kind of accept as part of our as part of our practices and part of the industry practice. But in an ideal world, like that device graph is a solid graph that I know that this iPhone, this IDFA belongs to this Roku, that belongs to this laptop and belongs to this iPad or Surface or whatever it may be. So in an ideal world, like we have a very clear device graph that connects all of those.
Similarly, I think one of our biggest challenges is having that overall view of all of the touch points for a particular customer. Since we're saying magic wand, I'm just going to say I want all of the view-based touch points, as well as the click-based touch point. When a person sees a billboard and then sees an ad on their mobile, I want to know all about it. It has to be stitched with a single ID in one database. And on top of that, there's an awesome multi-touch attribution model that accounts for incrementality. I want all of that at the most granular level, at the creative level.
Yeah, I would second the viewability part.
Yeah.
I didn't really capture
because that part is
that's definitely where the
huge.
magic wand is like.
Yeah.
So now, John, to your point.
So you're going to build that for us, right?
Yeah, I'm already working on it. So we've got a lot of engineers in the crowd here, and they're working on it hard right now. So, John, to your point, you mentioned it's 2018. It seems like a lot of these things, we should have solved. Let's say we're sitting on these same couches, and it's 2019. or it's 2021. What is different, or what do you see being different in the next 1 and 3 years in terms of how we do this, how we connect ads to outcomes?
Yeah, well, so I get the distinguished honor of being the first person to use the word AI up here today. So, I mean, I'm like fully certain that this will, that AI and good ML will sort of like take over on this. I can't remember what is the Google product? UAC? What is the?
UAC?
Yeah. I've forgotten the acronym for it or initialism, but I'm almost certain that that's what we'll be talking about. That we're going to have to figure out some way to where human creativity can supplement AI technology that will really be a force in the industry. But I think that the thing about AI and machine learning is that anything that can be broken down into math, you can automate, right? But the one thing that you can't automate is creativity. It just doesn't. That's the one protection that humans have against technology. And I think that in marketing there is a creative element to it. There's absolutely like a pattern to how we do things, but there's absolutely a creative element to it. And so I think the discussion that we're going to be having is how do we really use AI technologies to empower the creative side of things as opposed to like the other way around. Like that AI should really be subservient to the creative part of things as opposed to that we're trying to catch up to the AI. So that's what I would say. And I think that sounds like really general. It sounds like a generic thing to say on a panel, but I think that's what it'll probably be.
One of the lines with the keynote we heard yesterday, right? That data and what machines are good at helps scale the creativity that we had. I think it is directly in line.
I can go. I'm not going to beat the MTA horse to death. It seems like every panel talks about MTA, but assume that's a given in a year or two. We'd be off the last click and into MTA. Another thing is along the lines of automation. So I had alluded to the fact that we actually manage each of our regions separately. It's got its own P&L. It's got its own media mix. So that's impossible if you think about 7 different general channels across 80 different regions. It's not humanly possible to be able to get the perfect media mix in those permutations. So I would imagine that 3 years from now, a lot of that would be automated. We would have a machine that recommends the media mix by region for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, and this is probably just specific to my world, but I think like to your point about the device graph, I think hopefully that exists at that point, and maybe it just almost becomes more of a product question at that point, or user experience question at that point, where it's like, how do I, what's the different pathways of someone watching content, right? They like maybe watch a little bit on cable, then we watch on mobile, and then we can show them an ad to like upsell them to our Roku app, and we're pushing people back and forth to different places. Like, what is the right journey that creates the most viewing, that we can find the right people at the right times to watch content? I think that's a question that we're just not close to being able to answer yet. But hopefully, once all those pieces are in place, yeah, it's almost like a less of like a tech question. It's like, okay, now what do we do with this?
Let's have a huge round of applause for our panelists. And thank you, everyone.